Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Prospect Charter School's Algebra 1 course. Today we're going over section 3.2, Solving Inequalities by Adding and Subtracting. Now we already know what inequalities are and we know what symbols there are. Now we need to be able to solve them. We know that sometimes that we have variables involved. We saw that in the final example of the last lesson. So let's say for a moment that we are told that we need to solve for x given that x plus 2 has to be greater than 6. Well, in previous lessons, we saw stuff where we had x plus 2 was equal to 6. And we remember how to solve those. We would subtract 2 from both sides, and we'd be left with x is equal to 4. Well, now that we're in inequality land, the inequality acts like an equal sign. So we solve it the same way, except we have to make sure that Pac-Man's going the right way. So for this case, we would subtract 2 from both sides of the inequality sign, and we would end up with x is greater than 4. And because this means that we have an infinite number of solutions, we have to graph it. So draw our little number line. We know that 5 is greater than 4. We know that we don't have a bar, so we would have an open circle, and we would go towards 5. That's what I like to call a test point. Whenever I'm unsure of which direction that it's supposed to go, I use a test point, and I use an interesting saying. If true, then through. If false, flee. So for an example, if I plug in 0 for this equation, if I say 0 is greater than 4, this is obviously false. So I would look for where 0 is on my number line, and I would go the opposite direction. I would flee from it. I would run away from it. But if I used 5 as my test point, well, 5 is greater than 4. It's a true statement. So I go from my starting point through 5 to make my line. So if true, then through. If false, flee when we're solving these. Now let's look at another one that's a little bit more complicated. Let's say for a moment, I'll leave this up here so you guys can write through it. Let's say for a moment that we have x plus 9 is less than 15. Well, to solve for x, we first have to subtract 9 from both sides. That gives me that x is less than 6. I then draw a number line. I start at 6, and then I use a test point. I'm going to use 7 as a test point. Is 7 less than 6? No, that's false. 7 is greater than 6. So I would start at 6 with an open circle because I don't have a bar. I look at my test point of 7, and because it made a false statement, I flee from it. So I go the opposite way. I go from 6 and flee from 7. Now, what if I had something like d minus 3 is greater than negative 6? Well, I go through the same routine, right? I first want to get d by itself, so I'm going to add 3 to both sides. both sides of the inequality sign. When I do that, I end up with d is greater than negative 3, because negative 6 plus 3, start 6 to the left, move 3 to the right, you still end up 3 to the left. And then I go about graphing it. To graph it, I draw a number line. I start at negative 3, and I use a test point like, let's try negative 5. Actually, let's try 0. Is 0 greater than negative 3? Well, negative 3 means that I owe $3. 0 means that I'm debt-free. So I'm thinking that it's better to be debt-free than owing $3. So this is a true statement. So if true, then through. So there's my 0 over there. I'm going to start from my negative 3, and I'm going to go through the 0. Now, I know there's some other techniques to know which way your arrow is pointing. Feel free to use them. But the only one that I've seen that works 100% of the time is the test point. So I always tend to put in a test point, whether it be in one-dimensional, two-dimensional, or infinite dimensional. I put in a test point. If it makes a true statement, then it goes through that location. If it makes a false statement, it goes away from it. So let's say for a moment that we want to do some horse racing. And for the horse, they can have, or they are supposed to have, at most 250 pounds on their back. So the equipment for the bridle and all the other things, that the saddle, etc., for the horse, that stuff is going to weigh 30 pounds for equipment. So I need you to write and solve an inequality for the weight of a horse jockey. In other words, the guy that rides the horse when it's doing its race. So to do this, we know that the horse has to have at most 250 pounds. So 250 pounds is the absolute maximum, meaning we have to be less than or equal to that 250 pound limit. We have 30 pounds of equipment on the horse, but we also have the weight of the jockey. And do we know what the weight of the jockey is? No, it varies from person to person. So that would be x. And what we would do from here is solve for x. So to solve for x, we would subtract 30 from both sides, and we'd have 220 is less than or equal to x. And now we'd have to graph our inequality. So to graph our inequality, first we draw a line, a number line. We start at 220, and then we use a test point. I'm going to use the test point of 200. Actually, I think my inequality sign is backwards, right? 250 has to be greater than or equal to the maximum weight. Okay, so this is actually reversed. My apologies for that. So it's good to think about things. Okay, let's say for a moment that we have, we have to be 220 pounds has to be greater than or equal to x. So we would start at 220, and we have a choice. We could either go to the right or we could go to the left. Now, one of the methods says that your Pac-Man, if you put a line in it kind of points to the direction that you're supposed to be going. But this is one of the cases where that's not true. Because if I put in a test point of 200, is 220 greater than or equal to 200? Well, yeah, it's 20 bigger than 200, so I'm obviously going through 200. So which way is my arrow pointing? Well, it's not pointing in the direction of our inequality sign, right? So that's one reason why I don't trust any of the other methods and why I prefer doing test points. Because when I plug in a test point, I know it will always be correct. I don't have to worry about positioning. I don't have to worry about order. I don't have to worry about any of that stuff. I make a test point. If the test point makes a true statement, I go through it. If it makes a false statement, I go the other way. All right. And that's it for today. Let's go ahead and move on to our homework assignment. Our homework for section 3.2 will start on page 179, and we will do numbers 1 through, and I think we're going to have a lot again, but not quite as many as last time because these are a little bit more complicated. Let's go 1 through 31 odd. And that's it. Good luck and have fun.